Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating and honestly incredibly improbable origin story of the 44th President of the United States. We're going to unpack the global movements and the highly unique background that shaped Barack Obama's journey all the way to the White House. Here's our roadmap for today. First, his time as the 44th U.S. President. Second, his diverse roots and childhood. Third, his search for identity through higher education and organizing. And finally, building a family. Section 1. The 44th U.S. President. Let's do a quick flash forward to establish the sheer historical weight of his administration before we dial back the clock. We're talking about a highly active two-term presidency packed with major milestones. You know the big ones. The historic election in 2008 as the first African-American president and taking home the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009. Then you have sweeping domestic legislation in 2010, like the Affordable Care Act and Dodd-Frank, right alongside massive foreign policy calls, like ordering the 2011 raid on Osama bin Laden. But how exactly did the man making these massive world-altering decisions actually get to that desk? That brings us to Section 2, Diverse Roots and Childhood, a literal world of contrasts. To really understand his foundation, we absolutely have to look at his parents. Talk about two entirely different worlds colliding. On one side, you have his mother, Ann Dunham. She was an 18-year-old from Kansas of English and Irish descent. On the other side, his father, Barack Obama Sr., a 27-year-old Luo Kenyan. And they met in, of all places, a 1960 Russian language class in Hawaii. The sheer statistical improbability of that meeting is exactly what kickstarted his uniquely diverse upbringing. And that diversity wasn't just in his background. It was totally geographic, too. Born in Honolulu in August 1961, he and his mom moved to Seattle just weeks later. They stayed a year, headed back to Hawaii. And then, after his parents divorce and his mom remarries, a 6-year-old Obama moves across the globe to Jakarta, Indonesia, before finally heading back to Honolulu at age 10. It was a childhood defined by constant, massive transitions.
4. That is the number of crucial years he spent living in Indonesia. It wasn't just a brief trip. He attended local schools, got English homeschooling, and actually learned to speak Indonesian fluently. But even more importantly, his Indonesian stepfather, Lolo Sutoro, taught him some tough lessons about resilience, giving him what Obama would later describe as a hard-headed assessment of how the world works.
So, returning to Hawaii meant another huge shift. He spent his teenage years back in Honolulu, mostly raised by his maternal grandparents, Madeline and Stanley Dunham. But here's a really relatable humanizing detail. He actively struggled with his multiracial identity. He wrote later about occasionally using substances just to, in his words, push questions of who I was out of my mind. He and his buddies even joked about being the Choom Gang. It really shows you a young guy who is deeply trying to find his footing in a complicated world.
Section 3. Higher Education and Organizing. The search for identity through academia and grassroots work.
Now, this search for identity was paired with some intense academic hustle. He started out at Occidental College in LA, which, by the way, is where he gave his first public speech against South African apartheid. Then he transfers over to Columbia University in New York to earn his bachelor's in political science, and the grand finale, Harvard Law School. He didn't just graduate magna cum laude, he made national headlines as the very first Black president of the prestigious Harvard Law Review. But beneath all that brilliant academic success, there was a lot of personal searching going on. Just listen to this incredibly raw excerpt from a letter he wrote to his college girlfriend, Alexandra McNear, in the early 80s. Caught without a class, a structure, or a tradition to support me, the only way to assuage my feelings of isolation are to absorb all the traditions, classes, make them mine, me theirs. You can really hear that profound sense of isolation, right? And that intense drive to literally absorb traditions so he could forge his own unique identity. And he took that newly forged identity straight to the south side of Chicago. Long before Harvard, he was heavily involved in grassroots community organizing. He directed the Developing Communities Project, he consulted for the Gamaliel Foundation, but the absolute standout was his work directing Illinois' Project Vote in 1992. Get this, he successfully registered an incredible 150,000 African-American voters. Just a massive achievement. 12. That represents the dozen years he spent teaching constitutional law at the University of Chicago Law School, from 1992 all the way to 2004. This was a critical era of intellectual development for him. He was deeply analyzing the law, all while keeping his roots firmly planted in his local Chicago community. Which brings us to our final chapter,
Section 4. Building a Family. The Mini United Nations.
Obama famously called his extended family a mini United Nations, and honestly, it's the perfect description. He once joked that he had relatives who looked like Bernie Mac, and others who looked exactly like Margaret Thatcher. His roots literally stretch from the small village of Moneygall in Ireland all the way back to Kenya. Genealogists even found distant links connecting him to an enslaved African man from the 1600s named John Punch, and to Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Talk about a family tree that holds literally all the profound contradictions of American history.
But, of course, the core of his immediate family started right back in Chicago. In 1989, he was a summer associate at the Sidley Austin law firm, and he meets Michelle Robinson, who was actually assigned to be his advisor. And here's a charming little anecdote. When he initially asked her out, she totally turned him down. No way. But luckily for him, she eventually changed her mind later that summer.
They got married in 1992 and built a family unit that would eventually move into the White House. They welcomed 2 daughters, Malia in 1998 and Sasha in 2001. Oh, and obviously, no rundown of this first family is complete without mentioning their famous Portuguese water dogs, Bo and Sunny. This immediate family really provided a crucial grounding structure for him amidst the absolute pressure cooker of national politics.
So what does this all mean? I want to leave you with a final question to chew on. How does a leader's early exposure to extremely diverse cultures and environments dictate their future governance? When you look back at his uniquely diverse parentage, that childhood spent across Indonesia and Hawaii, his real struggles with identity, and his grassroots organizing in Chicago, it becomes incredibly clear that this mini United Nations background directly informed the perspective of the 44th president. It really makes you think about how deeply our own origins shape the way we navigate and lead in the world, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll catch you on the next one.